Hey you guys, I'm Jack Ruston. Welcome to Ruston's Boneyard. Today it is the turn of the beef chili double-hander. Now, if you missed the beef mushroom and egg, the Middle Eastern lamb, the pork chili, or the roast chicken double-handers, you may be wondering, what the hell is a double-hander? Well, it is a skillet with unctuous meaty filling and then protein-sparing bread baked into and onto that, and then folded up into a giant, delicious, sort of soft taco calzone kind of wrap. And if you don't hold it with two hands, it's all going to go everywhere. And that's what's so awesome about it. Now, we've done these other fillings. We're expanding the range today. We're going to go with this beef chili. I've got some delicious bits of beef. I'm going to show you how to make this. These are from a beef forerib breakdown. So the ribeye section has been reserved for steaks. And this is the fat cap and the back ribs. And so what I'm going to do with my chili, I like to make a combination of ground beef and beef chunks. Let's strip down these back ribs. I'm just going to use a boning knife and just take the meat off these, letting the knife do the work. Just stay close to the bone. Now, elsewhere on my channel, there are videos showing you how to break down beef forerib, and I will put a link to that. Don't feel you have to do these bits of home butchery, but it's really nice to have the skills to do it if you want to. These bones we can keep and we can roast them off to go into bone broth. Now I'm going to get to work on this fat cap. I want my ground beef and my chunks to be pretty fatty, but that said, if there's really, really big, thick chunks of fat, then I might keep those back for making tallow. And the cap here, you know, in some places it's very thin and in some places it's quite thick. So just, you know, use your judgment if you're breaking one of these down. So some of these longer strips that I'm cutting here, these are going to go through the grinder. So I might just take the end where it's all entirely fat off. We do want it to be pretty fatty, you know. I like that kind of 30% kind of fat content in that ground beef. There's nothing worse than when it's too lean and it's all just dry. You know, you can always pour some rendered fat off these things. Okay, so I've separated this about half and half. I've got some sort of chunks here, and then on this side we've got some bits which are going to go through the grinder. I'm just going to take some of this these fattier bits, get that on the heat. So we've got that tallow starting to render out for us now, and I've got some onions here, red and white. So why am I using two kinds of onions? Because that's what I had in the cupboard. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to chop these up fine, and the trick to that is to halve your onion, peel off the outer layer, and then take your half. We are going to go in a fan over the top, quite close together, not cutting through the roots. And keep that root intact. I'm going to hold it together while we do this. So we go over the top in a fan and then cut just sideways through it. Again, don't go all the way through. And then 3 fingers in a line, knife in front of the fingers, and just do thin slices across this. And what you will end up with is perfectly diced onion. Here we go, look, we've got this lovely tallow. And we can just put some of this now into our casserole, and all these little bits can just go in there as well. So we'll put another fistful of this into here. Let that brown off. I'm going to season it really well with plenty of sea salt. And while I'm at it, just going to season all this meat. Lots and lots. This back on the heat, and into this casserole we can put our onion. Here we go, and we'll get that just softening on a low heat. Now to that onion we are going to add some garlic, and what I'm going to do is just crush these cloves. I've got 3 or 4 fat cloves of garlic, and now this garlic can just be roughly chopped. We don't need to be too fussy. It's all going to break down in there in the end. Now that can just go straight in with the onion. So we've got a bit of colour on this batch of ground beef now. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to retain that all in this bowl, get the next batch in, That can go in back on the heat. Here we go, here's that remainder of the ground beef. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pop some of the fat from that. I'm just going to tip it back in because I'm going to use this fat. Sear these pieces to a deep golden brown crust. We've got these lovely softened onions and garlic. And what we're going to do is we're going to pop in a bay leaf, a cinnamon stick, and you can use, you know, half a teaspoon of ground cinnamon if you can't get a cinnamon stick. Good scattering of this dried oregano, a teaspoon or so of ground cumin, a squeeze of tomato puree, put that in, like maybe a tablespoon or so. Now, I'm going to use two kinds of chili here. These are both dry chili powders, but we need to distinguish between chili for flavour and chili for heat. Now, this is chipotle, smoked chili, and I'm going to put, you know, half a teaspoon to a teaspoon of that in. That's going to provide that deep kind of smoky chili flavour. And this is a habanero powder, and it's extremely hot, really, really hot. Now, what I'm going to do with this, I'm just going to take a tiny, tiny bit. I'm just going to use the tip of a knife to pop a little bit in, maybe just a few grains more. And what that's going to do is it's going to provide a flash of heat that dies away very quickly when you're eating the chili. It won't be like if you put a lot of very hot fresh chilies in, then what happens is they tend to stay in your mouth for a long time. So you get this really insane heat and then it just won't go away. What this tiny little bit of very hot dry chili does is it just flashes up and then it dies, and it's a really nice way if you enjoy spicy food. It's a good approach. I'm going to get this back on the heat and just let these spices kind of infuse into the mixture. Now in the meantime, let's turn our beef chunks. What we're looking for is a bit of sort of colour on this underside of them, like this. So you've got this nice brown crust. Maillard reactions. This is the caramelization. It's the depth of flavour. If it all goes into a skillet that's not quite hot enough, or if the meat's too cold, you know, what happens is it starts to just boil and go watery. Now we've got this wonderful earthy aroma of cumin and smoked chili coming off this. And what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to put my mince in. So we're going to put some tomatoes in here. I'm going to use these fresh tomatoes. And what we do is we're just going to take the skins off, because tomato skins in something like this, what they tend to do is to just never break down, and they float around in there in a nasty way. So I'm going to put a little cross with the tip of my knife in the end of each one, and then I'm going to put boiling water over these. You just pour it over from the kettle and just let them sit for a couple of minutes, which will allow the skins to separate. This has now got this wonderful colour on, and what we can do is just lift our pieces out into the casserole. Now we don't have to take all this rendered fat with us. There's no reason. It's done its job, which is to help us get this fantastic crust. You know, this colour. This comes from the fat and the salt and the heat. I can pour it into a little ramekin, and I've got a load of really great beef tallow there, which I can put in the fridge or in the freezer and use for all sorts of cooking. Let's have a look and see what's going on with these tomatoes. Just peel the skins off, and I'm just going to chop them. I'll go lengthways and then just into chunks. Now, they are going to break down as this braises away, this chili, and so I'm not really worried about the size of them too much. We'll just chop them roughly into these big chunks, because life is too short to dice everything. And the wonderful thing about this kind of chili is that, you know, if you're low carb, you can make this double hander, but the chili itself can be served with rice or whatever else for the rest of the family. So it's a really good way to feed different people with different dietary requirements. Add the tomatoes in. Now this needs a little more liquid, and we could add water or stock, but I'm just going to add some of these tinned tomatoes just to give us a little bit more liquid into here, a little bit more depth of flavour from that tomato. A little touch of boiling water from our kettle just to loosen it all. Now I'll tell you something about these kinds of chilies and sauces and things like this. They're always better the following day. If you cook it and then you leave it in the fridge overnight, come back the next day, it's always more intense. The flavours seem to meld together. I think it probably sort of loses water and gets more concentrated. And indeed, if you freeze it, it's even more so. Onto the heat, low heat, 3 or 4 hours. Okay, so this has been simmering away for a good 4 hours now. I've had to bring it outside because the light is so bad indoors. But what we can see is that it's got this coating of oils, rendered fats on the top. And this is what I call a sauce giving up its secrets. There's no water, there's no bubbling kind of murky water on the top. It's just clear fats. And we can keep those or we can pour them off. But the point is, it's really broken down. It's really tacky and sort of sticky, and it's not at all watery. These chunks of beef are completely falling apart. I can just push that one into 2 pieces with the silicone spatula, and the ground beef is all just soft and sticky and tacky. It's incredibly tasty. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to put the lid back on this, and I'm going to leave it until tomorrow, overnight in the fridge. And then tomorrow we'll make a double hander. So our chili has been in the fridge overnight. It's absolutely glorious, and we're just going to pop some chili in. This has just been warming over a low heat. We don't want to put this stuff into a searing hot, a smoking hot skillet, because what's going to happen if we do that is that it's going to burn the sugars in the chili. You know, there's tomato, onions, these kinds of things, you know, they give off sugars, cover the base of our skillet like this. And I'm going to put this on a heat just to warm this through now. Let's get on with our protein sparing bread. So we've got 4 eggs, and we're just going to separate the yolks from the whites, tip that yolk out across a smooth bit of the shell, and that way it doesn't usually get broken. It might do, and if it does, we want to make sure it doesn't run into our whites. If any ends up in there, we can just lift it out gently with a half of shell. Okay, now let's beat these to stiff peaks with our electric whisk. We want them really stiff, so we're going to keep going until they're really as stiff as we can get them. This is egg white protein powder, and what we're doing is just drying the mixture out a little bit by adding this powder. This is a 1/4 cup measure, and I'm going to take about 2/3 of it, a half, 2/3. It's like 15-20 grams. You don't have to be particular about exactly how much you put in. It's just enough to dry it out. And I'm going to put a good pinch of salt. We're going to mix it through again, but not quite as aggressively this time. We just want to incorporate it without really whisking it hard. As we can see, this is lovely, piping hot. Take little spatulas of this and spread it. I'm going to work it in to the meat. And what we're trying to do there is to create a unified kind of base layer of the chili and the egg. We want this to meld into one thing rather than, you know, the meat being completely separate from the topping. And then on top, just put all the rest of this egg, spread it around as if we're icing a cake. This lot goes into a 180 degrees centigrade, 350 Fahrenheit oven for 10 minutes. Now while that's cooking, let's make a guacamole. So, we've got some nice organic avocados here. Let's just halve them, just squeeze them out. Avocados love salt, so we're going to add a really good pinch of salt to this. Lime juice, sometimes if you roll them a bit under your palm like this before you cut them, it makes it easier to squeeze the juice out. The juice of a whole lime, it might actually need a bit more, we're going to taste. A little drop of Tabasco. Normally there's nothing I hate more than sauces and processed foods, but there's something that a drop of Tabasco does in guacamole that you can't get any other way. We've got these salad onions, spring onions, very finely chop these in. A green chili here, I'm going to take the end off, split it down the middle. I use my small knife, it's a little bit more appropriate. Scrape those seeds out of there. You can use the back of the knife. A teaspoon is a really good thing to use. In it goes. Garlic. Crush. Take the end off. If you get a thick root like this, just take it out because it can sometimes taste bitter. Very finely chopped. In it goes. Coriander. Cilantro. It doesn't matter if we get a few bits of stalk in there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put most of this in, almost all of it, but I'm going to keep a little bit back just for garnish. And then we're just going to use a fork and just mash into those avocados, mix all this together. Now, if, as is happening here, you know you've got big bits of avocado, what you might want to do is just take the knife and just get in there. Some people do this in a food processor, but I always think it's a shame when it is too finely pureed. We're not looking for a puree here, we want to keep the chunks. And I'm just going to have a little taste of it. And what I'm tasting for is the balance of salt and lime for the most part. It needs another drop of Tabasco. Don't want to go crazy, it's really easy to overpower it. Yep. Now, here is our double-hander. Let's just pop it down on here. Now what we're going to do is we're going to just turn this out onto a roasting rack to cool down a little bit because it's too hot to eat just now. I'm just going to run my spatula around the edge of the skillet, slide under there just to make sure it's free, and then one hand on the top, and I'm just going to flip it over like this. And you can see it's pretty good, but we've got a few little bits around the edge where we can afford to just come and just pop that back on top. All right, so we've just let this cool down a bit to more of a sort of eating kind of temperature. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to squeeze a little bit of lime straight onto the chili. It opens up your taste buds and the flavor of the chili comes in. It's like a flavor enhancer. It's making it more intense. A little scattering of our coriander, cilantro, shredded lettuce, and then guacamole, dump it on, down the middle. It's now time for the double-handed technique. Here's what we do. Just lift the edges, one hand underneath in the middle, and the other hand down at the base to close it off. And what you've got is the incredible Ruston's Boneyard Beef Chilli Double-Hander. I challenge you to make it. I challenge you to take a picture, stick it on Instagram, tag me at Ruston's Boneyard. Double-handers will change your life. Keep cooking.
It's very good.
Holy fucking shitball.
It's good.